Hey guys, welcome to the shop. My name is Rob, and today I'm going to be starting the first half of what's going to be a two-part project. You know, for about the past month, my wife and I have been working on the patio in our backyard, trying to get it to look the way we want, and we finally decided that we want the centerpiece to be a propane fire pit table. Now, if you haven't priced these, you know they can range anywhere from a couple hundred to a couple $1,000s. So to save a little bit of money, I'm going to build one myself. Now, I've divided this project into two parts. The first part, which I'm going to cover today, is going to be the lower cabinet, which holds the propane tank. The second part will be the tabletop, which holds the burner pan. Now, this project should involve a little bit of everything, mainly woodwork, but also some mechanical work and even tile work later on. And with that being said, guys, I got a lot of work to do myself, so I'm going to get right into it.
Okay, now before I make that first cut, I went ahead and made a basic layout of all the mechanical components of this project. And the key word there is basic. Now what this allows me to do is see where all the parts need to be in order for the project to function right. And from that I was able to get all the dimensions I need for both the top and the bottom of the table. And then what I like to do is just make a rough sketch on like a note card with those dimensions, and then I'll work off of that throughout the rest of the project. Now just a couple words about this burner unit. I did order it online through a company called American Fireglass. And it is a do-it-yourself kit made for somebody building their own fire pit table. Now, just from handling a little bit here, it does seem to be very well made. It is all stainless steel, and I also went ahead and ordered the electronic spark ignition so I don't have to manually light it with a match, as well as the key valve so I can control the flow of propane from outside the table. Alright, so for this project I'm going to use a combination of hardwood and 3/4 inch plywood. And the first thing I'm going to do is measure out the components on the plywood, rough cut them to size with a circular saw, and then we're going to cut them to final size on the table saw. Now the components I'm laying out right now are the two side panels and then the bottom of the cabinet. And I'm not even 3 minutes into this video and I just broke one of the main rules of woodworking, and that is to make sure you have the tools you're using plugged in. That always helps. There's nothing quite like lining up, getting ready to make a cut. You squeeze the trigger and literally nothing happens. So we're all plugged in now and ready to make some dust. Like I said, I'll cut that panel a little bit oversized, and then that'll give me plenty of room to cut it to final size on the table saw. Okay, I got my side panels and bottom cut out, and I also cut out some 1.5 inch square strips that I glued and screwed to the bottom of the side panels. Now these will act as support for the bottom of the cabinet, especially when that propane tank is sitting on there. It'll just give it a little extra strength overall. Now I'm going to go ahead and put together the parts that I have cut out, and then I'll measure directly from that for the front panel. Now the length of my front panel is too long to cut on the table saw, and I could use some other different hand saws to cut it, but what I'm going to do is go ahead and mark the length and rough cut it on the bandsaw, saving the line. Then I'm going to take it over to the disc sander and sand down to the line to finish the cut. Now before I assemble these main components, I'm going to cut out some maple strips to make a frame for the control plate. Now the control plate has the knob for the electronic ignition and the key valve. And what this frame is going to do is raise the plate up to the same height as the battens I'm going to wrap around our lower cabinet. Okay, now I want my frame for this plate to be a little bit bigger than the plate itself. We're going to go about an 1/8 inch. So that'll give me a 1/16 of an inch of play on each side. Now if we measure this plate, okay, the plate measures 6 3/8. So we're going to cut our frame at 6 1/2. Now that's getting a little bit short to cut on a saw. So we're going to cut it a different way to be a little bit safer and more accurate.
Hey guys, this shop started out as a pattern shop where my dad made all wood patterns for foundry castings. Now, most of you are familiar with metal machining, where you use a lathe or a milling machine to machine down metal to a couple thousandths of an inch. Well, pattern making is basically the same thing except for wood. And because you're making a wood pattern that's going to be cast in metal, the wood has to be shaped, cut to the tightest tolerances. Okay, now, how do we do that with wood? Okay, a pencil line just isn't going to cut it. A pencil line is too thick to cut down to a 32nd or even a 64th of an inch accurately. And the solution for that is to use a knife.
Okay, so we got our strip of maple here. We're going to measure out the length we need, which is 6.5. We're going to take the tip of the shop knife, which you definitely want to be sharp, put it right on the 6.5 and just make a little indent. Okay, you can see it right there. It's probably hard to see on the camera, but it's there. Then we're going to take our square, put our knife back on that dent, okay, butt the square up, and make a nice sharp pencil line. Hopefully you can see that line right there. And here we are again back at the bandsaw. When we make our cut, we're just going to save that knife line. Okay, you can see the bandsaw cut I made there. You can see the knife line. And to finish up the cut, what I'm going to do is come back to the disc sander and sand down to that knife line until the line itself actually breaks away. And what's actually happening is I'm sanding the knife line in half. And when you see that line break, that's when you know the cut's complete. Okay, now that I got my pieces cut out, I went ahead and just lightly spot glued them together just so I can work with the frame in one piece rather than a couple small pieces. I also went ahead and measured out where I want the frame to be. I'm going to keep it centered and just slightly to the top. And then I'm going to trace the opening because the electronic ignition module is going to go through that opening and into the cabinet. To cut out the opening, I just used a spur bit and a jigsaw. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue the frame down and hit it with the brad nailer to lock it in. Okay, I'm finally ready to start putting these pieces together. I'm going to start off by applying a layer of glue to the strips on those side panels, nailing down the bottom to hold it in place, and then driving home some screws to finish it off. And really the front panel is going to be put on the exact same way. Just a layer of glue all the way around, followed by a couple nails to hold everything in place, and I'll finish it off with some screws. Okay, the strips I'm attaching here not only help reinforce the cabinet, but they help seat the back panel, which is actually going to be removable. Now I also went ahead and cut out some strips that I'm going to attach the whole way around the top of the cabinet. I went ahead and pre-drilled these, and these are actually going to be what attaches the top to our base cabinet. I'm also going to add some trim around the frame I cut out earlier for the control panel, just to help to make it stand out, and it'll give our battens something to butt up against.
Okay guys, I finally got the main part of this case built, and the next step is to start wrapping the case with the boards that are going to go on the outside. Now before I start cutting anything, I want to take some measurements just to make sure that everything's going to lay out right. And what I mean by that is, I don't want to start with a full width board up top, work my way down, and then get to a real narrow board on the bottom. Okay, we can prevent that. So what I'm going to do is measure the height of the case. Okay, and we're dead on 24 inches. Now there's a couple different sizes of boards I can cut to get that. But what I'm going to do is cut 6 boards at 4 inches wide, wrap them the whole way around, and that'll give us dead on 24 inches.
Guys, since this project is going to be spending most of its time outside, I'm using 1x6 treated deck boards for the battens. Now when I ripped them down to 4 inches, I did cut off one of the radiused edges. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it back on with a 1/4 inch roundover bit and the trim router. Hey guys, sorry about that hissing sound. That's actually a leak in my air line. But installing these battens is pretty straightforward. I'm going to first make sure that the case is sitting on a good flat surface. That way when I install the battens, they won't be crooked. Then I'm just going to apply glue to the back of each board, stack them on top of one another, and then fasten them down with a nail gun. And to get things done a little bit faster, I'm going to kick it in overdrive. coming around the front of the case, the battens are going to go on the exact same way, but I am going to have to cut out around the control panel frame that I put on earlier. And I'm just going to put the board up where it would be, mark it, and then use my combination square and pencil to mark where I need to cut out. Anytime I make a cut that needs to be fit around something, I always like to take sandpaper and just go over the edges and get rid of any splintered, sharp, or even any fuzzy edges. That is one thing that drives me nuts, is fitting something in place and seeing like frayed wood sticking out. So after I do that, I'll just go ahead and fasten the rest of the boards in place.
Okay, now for the corner trim for this case, I'm going to use up some old treated lumber that I have lying around. And if you know anything about treated lumber, you know that it's notorious for warping, bowing, twisting, just changing shapes in general. And this board behind me is no different. Take a look at this. Okay, this is a pretty old board. It's been lying around for a little while. All right, both ends are touching the plywood. Look at the space underneath that board. Okay, that's a pretty bad bow. Now, how can we use it? Well, one of the best ways to use it is if we have any short pieces that we need to cut. So for this corner trim, I'm going to cut the length at 25 inches, and then we'll run it through the joiner, planer, and then resaw it, and we can still get a good usable piece out of it. When I install this corner trim, I'm actually going to use both pieces of trim at the same time, just so they can help line each other up and make sure that there's no gaps once I fasten it down permanently. Now, I also like to use something to simulate the top of the table. And in this case here, it's actually the top to an old nightstand. I can butt the trim up against that and fasten it down, and then that way when I put the real top on, everything will be nice and flush. I also decided to add the same size trim boards to both the top and bottom, just to give the whole project a more paneled look. It'll also go good with our French country farmhouse theme. Okay, now I'm finally ready to start building the back side of this cabinet, and that's going to be a little bit different because, like I said earlier, we're going to have gas lines and a propane tank inside of this. I can't make it solid because I got to have a way to at least get the propane tank in and out when I need to change it. So what I'm going to do is make this back portion a removable panel.
To make this process a little easier, I'm going to fasten some scrap strips of lumber to the bottom cabinet. I'm also going to fasten my plywood panel to those same strips, which will hold it in the proper location with the proper spacing. That way I can go ahead and fasten down the rest of the battens. Now in that top batten, I cut a slot so that I can actually get my hand in there and pull the back panel off. And then to clean it up, I'm going to use the spindle sander and then put a 1/4 inch radius on it with the trim router. After I got that back panel put together, I tested it just to see how it would move, and it's a little tight against the top. Now, something else to remember is I'm going to be painting this, so if anything, it's going to be tighter yet. So just to give it a little bit of clearance, I'm going to go ahead and shave a little bit off on the table saw, and I'm going to cut it with 5 degrees draft or 5 degrees bevel, just to help loosen it up a little bit. Now when I trimmed this panel, I actually ripped off the radius edge. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back on with a trim router. And you can see the gap there is much better. That gives us just a little bit extra room. And when I go to test it out, it's actually not scraping. So that way when we paint this panel, it won't be as tight. And then I'm going to finish up by making sure the battens are even on the disc sander.
Guys, I'm finally on the home stretch for building this base cabinet. And the last thing I'm going to do to make this a standalone piece of furniture and to help with that farmhouse look is to add some bun feet. Now I'm going to do that by gluing them down to our base cabinet and running one 6-inch wood screw down through the center.
Before I screw this foot down, I'm going to bond it down to the bottom of the base cabinet using some automotive body filler. I like to use this stuff because it sets up fast, it's strong, and it bonds well to any surface that has gaps or isn't perfectly flat. Now I didn't show it here, but I did use a 3/16 bit to drill a pilot hole down through the foot and into the cabinet. I'm also going to put a little bit of wax on the screw before I drive it in, because the last thing I want to happen is for that screw to snap off inside the foot. Guys, it is time to start putting some finish on this base cabinet. Now I'm going to start off by doing some sanding just to get rid of any heavy machine marks. Then I'm going to fill in the gap around that control plate and all the nail holes with some latex caulking. When it comes to paint, I'm going to give this cabinet a stressed look. When I say stressed, I mean I want it to look worn. Now there's a couple different ways you can do that. What I like to do is use 2 different colors. I'm going to start by painting this brown, and then I'm going to go over it again with 2 coats of cream color. And then when I sand it, especially the edges and corners, the brown will show through, and that makes that stressed, worn look stand out even more. And to put the final touches on this finish, I'm going to use 50 grit sandpaper and go over all the edges and corners. Now the good thing about this is you can customize this to your liking. You can go light or you can go really heavy and give it a really worn look. But for this project, I'm just going to go with a light stressing.
Now with all the painting and sanding out of the way, the first half of this fire pit table is complete. And what we have is really a rock solid table base that would last us as long as we want it to. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to check out my channel. And if you like what you saw here today, maybe you can consider liking and subscribing. I'll have part 2 of this project coming up, as well as a lot of other woodworking and home improvement type things. Guys, take care, and I hope to see you again back at the shop.